The war had lasted for 300 years. 300 years of blood and fire. 300 years of human suffering under the boot of the Elven Empire. The Immortal Ones had come from beyond the Great Sea with their silver ships and their ancient magic. They had conquered every kingdom. They had burned every city. They had made slaves of every race they found. But humans were different. Humans refused to break. General Marcus Stone stood on the muddy battlefield of Thornfield Valley. Behind him, 40,000 human soldiers waited in silence. They were not professional warriors. They were farmers and blacksmiths and teachers. They were fathers and mothers and children who had grown up too fast. They wore armor made from melted church bells and carried swords forged from broken chains. They had nothing but courage and desperation. Across the valley, the Elven army spread like a silver sea. 100,000 immortal warriors in perfect formation. Their armor glowed with magical enchantments. Their weapons hummed with deadly power. Behind them rose massive war beasts that could crush 100 men with one step. Above them flew dragon riders on creatures of nightmare and flame. And at the center of it all stood the Elven Queen herself. Queen Seraphina had ruled the Elven Empire for 10,000 years. She had conquered 100 worlds. She had destroyed civilizations older than human memory. Her power was absolute. Her magic was beyond comprehension. She wore a crown of living starlight and carried a staff carved from the world tree itself. With one word, she could shatter mountains. With one gesture, she could boil oceans dry. She looked at the human army with ancient eyes full of contempt. These creatures lived such short lives. They were born, they struggled, they died, all in the blink of an elven eye. They were nothing. They were insects pretending to be soldiers. Marcus watched the Elven Queen raise her staff toward the sky. He had seen this before. He had survived it 3 times. Most humans died the first time they witnessed the blood sky spell. It was the most powerful magic in the Elven arsenal. It turned the very heavens into a weapon of destruction. The staff rose higher. The air grew cold. The wind stopped completely. Every bird fell silent. Every animal fled. The world itself seemed to hold its breath. Then the sky turned blood red. It happened in an instant. The blue disappeared. The clouds burned away. The sun turned black as the crimson light swallowed everything. From this red sky, fire began to fall. Not rain. Fire. Droplets of liquid flame that burned through armor, through flesh, through bone. Droplets that could not be stopped by shield or shelter. The human soldiers screamed. Many ran. Many fell to their knees and prayed to gods who had abandoned them long ago. But Marcus did not move. He stood perfectly still and watched the fire fall around him. He felt the heat on his skin. He smelled the burning air, and he smiled. Because the fire did not touch him, Queen Seraphina narrowed her ancient eyes. Something was wrong. The blood sky should have killed every human on that field. It should have turned them to ash and memory. But the human general stood untouched. And around him, other humans were standing too. She pushed more power into the spell. The fire fell harder. The sky grew darker. The heat became unbearable. Still, the humans stood. Marcus raised his hand and showed the queen what he held. It was a small device, no bigger than a coin. It glowed with soft blue light. It hummed with a frequency that hurt elven ears. It was human technology. For 300 years, humans had fought with swords and shields. They had tried to match elven magic with steel and courage. They had failed. They had died by the millions. But they had never stopped thinking. They had never stopped learning. They had never stopped working. In secret laboratories, hidden deep underground, human scientists had studied elven magic. They had captured spells and dissected them. They had learned their patterns and their weaknesses. They had discovered that magic was just another form of energy, following rules that could be understood and predicted. And then they had built machines to break those rules. The device in Marcus's hand was called a nullifier. It created a field that disrupted magical energy. It turned the most powerful spells into harmless light. It made the immortal elves vulnerable for the first time in their endless lives. Marcus had distributed 50,000 nullifiers to his army. Every soldier carried one. Every soldier was now immune to elven magic. The blood sky flickered. The fire faded. The red light began to crack like old paint. Queen Seraphina felt something she had not felt in 10,000 years. She felt fear. She lowered her staff and stared at the human army in disbelief. How was this possible? How could these short-lived creatures defy the natural order? How could they stand against power that had conquered gods? Marcus drew his sword. It was not magical. It was not special. It was simple steel, forged by human hands in human fire. But it was enough. He raised the blade high and turned to face his soldiers. They had stopped running. They had stopped screaming. They were watching him with new hope in their eyes. Marcus spoke loudly so everyone could hear. His voice carried across the valley. It reached every human ear. It reached every elven ear, too. He told them that today was different. Today they had weapons the elves had never seen. Today they had tools the elves could not understand. Today they would show these immortal conquerors what humans could do when pushed against the wall. He told them that humans had something the elves would never understand. They had adaptability. They had innovation. They had the fire of desperation that burned brighter than any magic. He told them that the elves had forgotten what it meant to struggle. They had forgotten what it meant to fight for survival. They had grown soft in their immortality. They had grown weak in their certainty. But humans remembered. Humans always remembered. Because humans had to earn every moment of their short lives. Every breath was precious. Every heartbeat was a victory. Marcus turned back to face the Elven Queen. He pointed his sword directly at her. He gave the order to charge. 40,000 humans surged forward with a roar that shook the mountains. They ran across the muddy field with weapons raised. They screamed their rage and their hope and their determination. The elven army responded with magic. Fireballs flew through the air. Lightning crackled from staffs. Ice spears shot from glowing hands. Every spell failed. Every attack fizzled against the nullifier fields. The elves watched in horror as their greatest weapons became useless. The two armies crashed together like waves of flesh and steel. The elves were better fighters individually. They had trained for thousands of years. But they had never fought without magic. They had never faced an enemy they could not simply destroy with a wave of their hand. They had never faced humans who were not afraid to die. The battle was brutal. Blood soaked the ground. Bodies piled high. But the humans kept pushing. They fought with savage fury born of centuries of oppression. They fought for their dead families. They fought for their destroyed homes. They fought for the future of their species. Marcus cut his way through the elven ranks. His sword rose and fell. His arm grew tired. His armor grew heavy with blood. But he did not stop. He had one goal. One target? The Elven Queen. She saw him coming. She tried to flee. But her own soldiers blocked her path. The elven lines were collapsing. Warriors who had never known defeat were dying by the hundreds. Panic spread through the immortal army like plague. Marcus reached the queen at last. She swung her staff at his head. He blocked with his sword. The staff cracked. The queen staggered back with shock in her ancient eyes. She could not believe it. She had conquered worlds. She had destroyed civilizations. And now she was being defeated by a creature who would be dead of old age in a few decades. Marcus raised his sword for the killing blow. But he stopped. He looked into the queen's eyes. He saw the fear there. He saw the confusion. He saw, for the first time, vulnerability in an immortal being. He lowered his sword and spoke to her directly. He told her that humans could kill her here. They had earned that right. They had paid for it with millions of lives over 300 years. But killing her would not end the war. It would not save the enslaved humans across the galaxy. It would only create a power vacuum that another elf would fill. So Marcus offered something different. He offered peace. Real peace. Not the peace of submission, but the peace of equals. Humans would be free. The Elven Empire would withdraw from human worlds, and the two species would learn to coexist. The Queen laughed bitterly. She asked why she should accept terms from creatures she could outlive by millennia. Marcus smiled and showed her the battlefield. Her army was broken. Her magic was useless. Her legend of invincibility was dead. He told her that humans had created these nullifiers in hidden laboratories over decades. But now they knew it was possible. Now they would build better versions, stronger versions. They would share this technology with every enslaved race in the galaxy. The age of elven dominance was over. Not because elves were weak, but because they had stopped growing. They had stopped adapting. They had believed their power was eternal. Humans never stopped growing. Humans never stopped adapting. That was their greatest strength. The Queen looked at the carnage around her. She looked at the human soldiers who refused to kneel. She looked at the sky, which had returned to its natural blue. For the first time in 10,000 years, she made a decision based on wisdom instead of pride. She accepted the peace. The war ended that day on the bloody fields of Thornfield Valley. It took years to negotiate the details. It took decades to heal the wounds. But humans earned their freedom not through mercy, but through strength. And across the galaxy, other enslaved races heard the story. They heard how 40,000 humans defeated 100,000 elves. They heard how short-lived creatures brought immortal conquerors to their knees. They heard how innovation and determination could overcome any power. They began to build their own nullifiers. They began to plan their own rebellions. They began to hope. The Elven Empire did not fall overnight, but it began to shrink. It began to change. It began to treat other races with respect instead of contempt, because they had learned a truth that humans had always known. The strength of a species was not measured in years lived or magic wielded. It was measured in the willingness to fight against impossible odds. It was measured in the refusal to accept defeat. It was measured in the fire that burned in mortal hearts. And that fire, the elves finally understood, could never be extinguished.